Hello everybody and welcome to Kilroy Was Here, a series of reviews focused on movies about or set in the time of World War II. Our goal? To dig a little bit deeper.
Is it possible
and not just
that World
give you
War
a
II
review of the
didn't
movie,
have to
but
happen?
also give you a sense
Well, that's certainly
of
what
the
Munich,
movie meant in
The Edge of
time when it
War,
was
and
made,
a whole lot
and
of
how
speculative
that
what-if history
movie's
would have you
time
believe.
shapes
So
our-
today on Kilroy Was Here, we're going to spend some time digging into the possibilities of could World War II have been avoided? Hello everyone and welcome back to Kilroy Was Here, the ongoing video podcast where we discuss movies that are about World War II, whether they were made during the war, after the war, or long after the war. Our goal in every episode is to take you, the viewer, back to the time that the movie was set, and then also consider it from the standpoint of when the movie was made, what it was trying to say to the audience that the producers knew would see the movie. And then lastly, when appropriate, we want to try to conceptualize the movie into how it fits into our world right now. This video is being made in December 2023. The world is again in a phase of real increasing chaos and perceived threat. I tend to think that we're closer and closer to being in the early 1930s in terms of a historical analog. And that makes today's movie particularly helpful. My name is Matt Bromond. I'm the host for Kilroy Was Here. And my hope is that you will engage in our comments and have a dialogue, because I personally think that World War II and movies about World War II provide a really useful lens for us to evaluate the world we live in today. But with that said, let's get into the movie today. Today, the movie is Munich, The Edge of War. This movie was made in 2021 and features a largely European cast, including a number of German actors and British actors. It also makes extensive use of dialogue in German, and so that means you're going to have to do a little bit of reading and subtitles unless you speak German. But it has the added benefit as a result of giving you information in the original language and making those scenes that are set in Nazi Germany feel much more authentic and lived in, rather than what we see in a lot of other movies in this period where there's almost a cartoonish quality to the German or Japanese characters. Now, with that said, we always start our production by looking at how this was conveyed historically. What history are we talking about here? Now, the first thing to know about the Munich Peace Conference is that it didn't happen in a vacuum. It was actually the culmination of a long strategy by Adolf Hitler to change the situation in Europe. What was the situation in Europe? Well, almost no one watching this podcast, I suspect, is going to be unaware of the fact that the German situation in World War II was really defined as a result of the outcome of World War I. World War I ended in 1918. The Treaty of Versailles had the victorious Allies imposing really harsh conditions on Germany, conditions that would cause most of the Germans to feel like they'd been poorly treated by the rest of the world, nurturing resentments. When you add into that the Great Depression that followed, well, you had a seething, resentful population that was also experiencing real economic hardship. In that world, Adolf Hitler went from being a unsuccessful artist and successful foot-level soldier to being a political rabble-rouser and successful mobilizer of resentments. This is important, I think, when we look at 2023, because we can recognize that when a large population feels unseen and unheard, they tend to support political causes and candidates that give voice to their resentment, regardless of whether or not those policies will make anyone's life any better. Adolf Hitler, for his part, started in November 1922 with an attempted coup against the democratic government of Germany. This failed, but it's known as the Beer Hall Putsch, and its location is particularly important for everything we're going to talk about later, because Adolf Hitler was emotionally connected most of all to Bavaria, a part of southern Germany, and to the city of München, or in English as we call it, Munich. Now, München was a largely Catholic city. It had been incorporated into Germany relatively late in the process of German unification, and it had a very distinct identity. In a way, it's similar to how Americans see Texas. Now, by 1924, Adolf Hitler's failed beer hall push had seen him put on trial for treason, and ordinarily, being put on trial for treason would be an end to someone's political career. But because of the resentments in Germany and because of a massive amount of grievances in Germany, it wasn't an end for Hitler. It was in fact an opportunity for him to gain support. This also seems somewhat similar to modern American politics, where situations involving law enforcement that would normally end up someone's political aspirations instead give that politician the opportunity to gather more support under the theory that the prosecution is politically motivated. Hitler was convicted, and while convicted, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, My Struggle, and in it he lays out his extensive grievances and his theory of how everything went so badly wrong for Germany. His answer was there are enemies of the German race, the German race being a completely contrived invention, because in fact there's only one race, the human race, and everything we do to try to artificially divide ourselves is just so much of a head game we play with ourselves. We can make children with any other human, and those children will be healthy and be able to live. It's nonsense, but Hitler made very clear in Mein Kampf that he intended to achieve by force the German aspiration to control more territory in Europe. This is important because this was 1925. World War II in Europe didn't start until 1939, but it was already there by 1925. Now, when we move forward from there, Hitler adopted a very political strategy to gain power. He started running for elections rather than trying to achieve another coup. Now, what happened after that? Well, by 1932, he had successfully achieved a 36.9% share of the electorate in Germany. This was the biggest single party victory, but it wasn't a majority. But it does indicate that a large number of the German people were comfortable with Nazi policies, programs, and with Adolf Hitler in particular. He then became chancellor in 1933 because a coalition of conservative party leaders thought that they could use Hitler to control the streets. Hitler already had a large army of thugs called the Sturmabteilung, or the stormtroopers, and he used them to achieve control of German streets, mostly by using violence against communists and Jews. The conservative parties of Germany, which controlled the balance of power, believed that Hitler could therefore stabilize the country. They made him chancellor. They thought they controlled it. They were wrong. When Hindenburg, the president of Germany, died, he named himself Führer, combining the offices of chancellor, or political leader, and president, or head of state, into one office, that of the Führer. By 1934, therefore, anyone in Germany and anyone in Europe could see that this was a man who was determined to acquire immense amounts of personal power. In 1935, the German state decided to explicitly violate the Versailles Treaty and create the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, and also begin rearmament. This was really clearly a violation of the Versailles Treaty, and the Allies did nothing. Then, in September of 1935, they passed the Nuremberg race laws, which declared that Jews were enemies of the race state of Germany. That, from that moment on, anyone looking at Europe could have seen that Germany had the intention of harming Jews in their territory and ideally expelling them completely from the German state. Later that year, in November, they added Romani, or what we commonly know, and is a bit of a pejorative, is gypsies, the Romani, and black people to the list of race enemies. Now, that there weren't a whole lot of black people in Germany, but Hitler was so broad-minded in his ambitions that he thought he needed to make clear that black people were also not included within the acceptable range of races in the German state. So, we get to March 1936. Germany occupies the Rhineland, another violation of the Versailles Treaty, and another opportunity for the allies of Europe to say no to the Nazis. But they didn't do anything. Then the summer of 1936, Hitler stages the Olympic Games, and in the Olympic Games he makes really clear that there is only one thing he considers to be acceptably German, and that is very white people who have no Jewish descent, no Romani blood in their system. Again, the world was not unaware of what Hitler was by the Olympics of 1936. But, just to be clear, in March of 1938, Hitler accomplished the Anschluss, or the annexation of Austria. This wasn't done through an election. This was done, again, through basically a coup. Then, finally, we get to 1938. Now, in September of 1938, again, this is 6 months after the Anschluss, Hitler says, I'm going to go to war to get the German people in Western Czechoslovakia into the Reich. France and Britain know by this point that Hitler intends to expel all the Jews. He intends to expand Germany by force, and he's more than willing to have done so, because he did so in the Rhineland by remilitarizing it, and in Austria by annexing it. At this point, we get to the events that the Munich movie seeks to describe. Now, the conventional history about the Munich Conference is that Hitler got Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, and Deluded, the French Prime Minister, to appease him by letting him take the Western territories of Czechoslovakia. That's the conventional narrative, and the conventional narrative is that if they had not done that, if, say, Winston Churchill had been Prime Minister of Britain at the time of the Munich Conference, that there would have been a more forceful response, and that the war would have been either eliminated, prevented, or concluded at a much lower human cost, because at that point the French and the British were massively more powerful than the Germans. That's the conventional narrative. The movie puts forward a slightly different narrative, and we're going to talk about that next. Now, the Munich Peace Conference and the Munich movie, Munich the Edge of War, all center around the dilemma that Great Britain faced in 1938. Great Britain in 1938 had seen an entire generation slaughtered in the Great War. They had struggled to maintain their global empire, and they continued to believe they were the most powerful country on earth, although they were beginning to get the sneaking suspicion that the United States might actually be stronger. But they definitely thought that the only way for the British Empire to be sustained was to avoid another general war in Europe, because the British knew that World War I had nearly bankrupted the country. They also knew that the French really didn't want to fight Germany again, even though France had, in essence, come out significantly ahead as a result of World War I. So it's an interesting thing that the British Prime Minister was facing in 1938. He has a country who he knows doesn't want to fight a war. He himself doesn't want to fight a war. And he knows the French don't want to fight a war. But he's seen an Adolf Hitler who has no problem threatening war, no problem rearming, and has spent more than a decade committing to rhetoric of war, violence, and conquest. The movie presents the dilemma that Chamberlain and the rest of the world faced at the Munich Peace Conference through the perspective of two friends of a similar age. They were both collegians. They both studied English and German. One is German, one is English. The English character in the movie is largely forgettable. He's there mostly to make the audience feel how repugnant and awful everything Nazism is. And because by 2021, everyone in the world has basically come to the consensus opinion that Hitler is everything evil incarnate. If you want to make anybody look awful, you say they're like Hitler. They say they're like Nazis. So to have an entire character, a lead character, devoted to giving you, the audience, a perspective into how awful the Germans are, and by comparison how great the British are, seems unnecessary. And it also means that in the movie a whole lot of time is devoted to fleshing out this character, giving him a wife, giving him marital problems, giving him stress with protecting his various bosses, because he works for Chamberlain, but he also works for the Foreign Office, and there are senior guys who don't want to listen to him, and there are junior guys who he's competing with. It's a whole lot of stuff that doesn't relate to the core dilemma. The core dilemma in the movie is expressed through the German lead character. Now, this person is played by an actor named Johannes Niewohner. Johannes Niewohner. And I wanted to take a second to try to get that right. I don't speak German. I don't have that as my language, but I do believe that people should have their names said the way they want. And Johannes Niewohner is the actor who plays the German lead. Now, this character is much more fascinating than the British character. In the movie, he starts with a mindset of being pro-Nazi, or at least pro-German restoration. And that's really how a lot of Germans saw it. They saw it as they're restoring their place in the hierarchy of nations. But over the course of the movie, he sees again and again how Nazism is brutal and violent and ultimately committed to conquest. And so through his eyes, we see how it is that 36.9% of the German people could ever vote for a Nazi and then ultimately see their revulsion from it. He, in a very fictionalized way, comes across a document that formally commits Germany to a path of expansion by war. Now, this is a fictional document, this is a fictional scenario in the Munich Peace Conference, but the truth is, anybody who was paying any attention at all to Adolf Hitler would know that Hitler was committed to conquest by force. They would know that. So the movie throws in an artificial simplification tool to get at what could have been done through, a short montage of Hitler's greatest hits. Because by the time of the Munich Peace Conference, there was really no doubt what Hitler was going to do. The second main lead character in the movie is played by Jeremy Irons. He plays Neville Chamberlain. And by casting Jeremy Irons to play Neville Chamberlain, we get a very nice two-movie bookend where Jeremy Irons plays Neville Chamberlain before the war, and Winston Churchill is played by Gary Oldman in the earlier movie, The Darkest Hour. We'll get to that movie too, eventually, because it's really interesting to see what happens when a truly talented actor takes on a historical person. Jeremy Irons, famous to a lot of Americans for his being the voice of Scar in The Lion King, but truly a well-trained actor. I particularly loved him playing Henry IV in a dramatization of the Shakespeare plays. His voice conveys real gravitas and pain, and in every character he plays, there always seems to be an air of heaviness and regret, which is particularly well suited for Chamberlain, because in this movie, Chamberlain is presented as a man who is truly determined to avoid war at any cost. And Chamberlain, from all the records I can find, is pretty accurately described that way. He was a conservative politician committed to the empire and the sustenance of British power, but also really, really determined not to be responsible for the death of millions of young people again. World War I left a scar on Jeremy Irons, and Jeremy Irons conveys that scar very well in his portrayal of Neville Chamberlain. Now, over the course of the movie, the director's aim of getting you to see that Chamberlain didn't think that Hitler was a peaceful man and didn't think that Hitler was truly going to ever become a peaceful man was balanced by Chamberlain's wager that Hitler could be bound down with diplomatic agreements and treaties into not fulfilling his violent ambitions. And the second thing is that the idea of Chamberlain that we get in this movie is that he believes that he can acquire necessary time for British rearmament by making a deal with Hitler presently. And that's really the core thrust of the movie, was Chamberlain right to believe that making a deal with Hitler and not going to war in the summer of 1938 would make the war a more likely win for Britain if it came later? The goal of making the war come later is what Chamberlain has as his primary hope, and then as a secondary hope he has this belief that if he can get Hitler to make a deal, Hitler will in fact turn away from war, that Hitler too must be repulsed by war. But the movie makes very clear, and I suspect it's unintentional given what I think the director was really trying to go for. The movie makes clear that Nazism is incapable of existing in a scenario of long-term peace. War is the reason for Nazism. The entire mindset. I mean, the book is called Mein Kampf, My Struggle, and Kampf is a German word that is often treated as a synonym for war, in the same way that jihad in Arabic is a word that means struggle, but is often treated in English translation as if it means just holy war. The truth is that both jihad and Kampf convey the very visceral sense that violence is a part of the struggle that they're going at. So, the movie itself conveys in very real and effective terms, the fear of war, the horror and revulsion of war by all of the civilized characters and nations, and on the other hand, the very real desire for war on the part of Hitler and the real Nazis in the movie. So, that's what the movie conveys. Does it do it well? Absolutely. The sets are perfect. The camera work is beautiful. The costumes are terrific. The actors are great, particularly by having so much of it accomplished in Germany, using German spoken word. You really get a sense of the foreboding, the increasing tension and anxiety. And in the climax of the movie, when the German lead character is trying to get this memo into the hands of the British government without being discovered himself, the anxiety of being anti-Nazi in Nazi Germany is conveyed tremendously effectively. So, what that means is this movie is a pleasant watch, it's intellectually stimulating, and it will cause you to really rethink whatever you think about Neville Chamberlain if you're educated enough about World War II to have an opinion about Neville Chamberlain. But we're sitting here looking at it from 2023. So the question has to be, from 2023, how well does this movie carry off its rhetorical argument? How well does it actually convince us that Neville Chamberlain was right to try to make peace with Hitler at Munich, to try to buy time, or to try to co-opt him into abiding by a treaty? This is where things get a little bit more complicated. Obviously, as a preliminary matter, it's really clear that it didn't work. We all know that the Munich Peace Conference only held general European peace for another year, that the Munich Peace Conference occurred in September of 1938, and Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939, beginning the European phase of the global war that we now call World War II. So, it didn't work. The second thing is, it didn't even really work for very long, because in November of 1938, Hitler engaged in Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, where the Nazi Party was truly unleashed across Jews all over Germany. And the world could see that. And here's where I think the Munich movie has one thing correct, because the world's response to Kristallnacht was not to say, Jews all over Germany, come to America. Come be safe in America. Just get out of Germany, come be here. Get out of Germany and come be safe somewhere in the British Empire. The British Empire had already made its declaration that there was going to be a Jewish homeland in the Middle East. That process, it's called Zionism, but the process of Jews convincing each other that they would be safer in the Middle East rather than in Europe was something that was already long-standing, ongoing. There was already an expanding Jewish population in the land we now recognize as Israel. But after Kristallnacht, the Western European nations did truly nothing to make it safer for Jews anywhere. So the time Chamberlain was buying didn't actually produce Chamberlain accomplishing meaningful changes in British policy to make anything better for the first victims of Nazism, the German Jews, Romani, black people. Just didn't. The second thing is, rearmament for the British Empire did not proceed aggressively until the war began in 1939. The British Parliament was still struggling over whether to commit to a massive rearmament of the RAF, the British Air Force. They were still completely undermanning the British Army. The British Navy got a plus up on its budget, but Navy construction takes years to get through. It takes, the reason we have as a truism that naval strategy is built strategy is because you don't fight a war today with the ships you decided to build 6 months ago. You fight a war today with the ships you agreed to build 6-7 years ago. So by the time we get to 1939, the 1 year of additional time didn't make a whole lot of difference in terms of British naval strategy and capacity. The British Parliament didn't authorize the kind of spending for British air power, nor did the British authorize the kind of spending for British army power. So Chamberlain bought time, but then didn't do much with the time. And the French situation was completely hopeless by 1938. Daladier knew his country wasn't going to fight. He knew his country didn't want to fight because they didn't fight for the Rhineland. They didn't object militarily when Hitler marched into the Rhineland and remilitarized that. And the whole reason it had been demilitarized in the first place was that the French, at the end of World War I, knew that they had no safety if there was a German army truly on the frontiers of the Rhine. If the German army could already get to the Rhine, then the problem for France was always going to be, how do I protect the Netherlands and Belgium, which are neutral, and how do I protect my own long land border with Germany from a German army that we know has a doctrine that's more aggressive than ours? So the French did nothing. So the extra year didn't make a difference for France either. So who did it make a difference for? Well, it sure made a difference for the rest of the Czechoslovak Republic, because shortly after getting the Sudetenland, the western part of Czechoslovakia, Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia. And with that, he gained the Skoda Armament Works, the Czech Army's resources, the Czech Army's armor. He gained massive amounts of military power by annexing Czechoslovakia, and the rest of Europe did nothing, even after Munich said, this is my last territorial ambition in Europe. So, did Chamberlain actually accomplish what he had hoped for on either wager? Did Hitler commit to peace by signing a new treaty? No. Was it reasonable to think that he would? No. He'd already violated the Versailles Treaty. He'd already violated every other agreement, and shortly after making the Munich Agreement, he marched in and took the rest of Czechoslovakia. He'd already shown by the Anschluss of Austria that he didn't particularly care what the rest of the world thought of his acquisitions. He was determined simply to gain more power for his Reich. Did his second wager play off? Did Britain get time to rearm effectively? They got time, but they didn't really do much with it. So that was kind of a waste too. So in the end, what do we get out of Munich, the edge of war? We get two things from the perspective of 2023. First, we get a movie that makes really clear how extremism, resentment, and violence can cause civilized people to tolerate completely uncivilized behavior. And as a result of uncivilized behavior, we get to a situation where more and more people will live in a society terrified. They will submit to terrific oppression, they will lie, they will conceal, they will abandon all bonds of fraternity and neighborliness. This is what we get out of Munich that's important for 2023, is we're looking in 2021, when the movie was made, on a time in 1938 when a civilized nation, the German nation, was widely considered to be a part of Western Europe and as civilized and as advanced as anyone, descended into barbarism and thuggery because of resentment and fear. So that suggests to us in 2023 that we have a real thing to learn out of World War II, which is you don't just wake up one day and have a global conflict between nations. It takes a long walk. Hitler's march to World War II began in 1922, and Hitler's actual war with civilization in Europe began when he wrote the Nuremberg Laws in 1935. So World War II ends in Europe in 1945, but Hitler writes the Nuremberg Laws in 1935. So that's 10 years, an entire decade, when civilization knew what Hitler was and what he was capable of doing, and just chose to turn a blind eye. So the lesson of Munich, the edge of war, is that we cannot, if we expect to have happy lives, turn a blind eye to barbarism as it grows. We can't ignore resentments and think that it's never going to turn into anything effective. Because the truth is, resentments, if long nurtured, do turn into people being willing to surrender their authority to demagogues, thugs, and bullies. So in that sense, the Munich Edge of War movie is particularly instructive in 2023. It's made with a modern sensibility. It's made with a recognition that there were villains in World War II, but there were a whole lot more victims. And some of the people who, during the war, we would have seen as our enemies, a lot of German people, were also victims of Nazism and the demagoguery it put across. It does fail on one of its ambitions, which is to get us to think of Chamberlain as a guy who did the best he could with what he had. Because the truth is, Chamberlain allowed his own fear of a second war to paralyze him in the face of what he could clearly see Hitler was all about. It's simply not persuasive to say that anyone who was at a senior level of government in Europe by 1938 had any doubts about what kind of a person Hitler was and what Hitler was going to do. Their only hope was to see Hitler overthrown, and the British and French didn't even put serious effort behind that. In the movie, it's pointed out that there was already a small group of German army officers that was convinced that Hitler was a madman and wanted to overthrow him. But they didn't have the power to do that on their own, and they certainly didn't have the ability in the face of the personal oath of loyalty Hitler had every person in the German armed forces swear. Every soldier and officer of the Wehrmacht, the German army, swore to obey Adolf Hitler to death. German military culture treats those oaths very seriously. As an American veteran, I can tell you, American military personnel take their oath very seriously to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. This American veterans believe. German military culture was even more focused on that obedience and loyalty and duty than American military culture. And the German oath was made to Adolf Hitler personally. So, if Britain and France had been serious about undermining Hitler with a coup from within his government, they really, really didn't put much work into it in 1938. And as a result, in September of 1939, the war began. Germany declared war on Poland. Britain had to come to war with them. Germany had secured a non-aggression pact with the Soviets, which is also probably part of what Chamberlain was thinking, was that Hitler won't go to war because he's more afraid of the Russians. It's hard to give Chamberlain that much credit because there's so many fantastical notions that have to be believed at the same time to make Chamberlain's approach of Munich make sense. You have to believe that Nazism will fail to a coup of German officers that the British Empire was not supporting or sustaining. You have to believe that Hitler will be bound by a treaty obligation when he has shown no willingness to be bound by any treaty at any point, period. You have to believe that Hitler is concerned about fighting the Soviets when Hitler's Mein Kampf makes clear that the number one enemy of Nazi Germany is communism, particularly the Soviet communists. So, that's what the movie argues. I don't think it's persuasive. But I have to confess that when Jeremy Irons plays Neville Chamberlain, you want to like him so much. You want to feel, you feel the weight so much that you can almost convince yourself that Chamberlain wasn't the error-prone fool that ultimately I think he was. Ultimately, I think the Munich Peace Conference, which was coordinated by Chamberlain, called for by Chamberlain, he put it in Munich because he thought that would make Hitler more compliant. He had Mussolini broker it because he thought that would make Hitler more compliant. Chamberlain authored the Munich Conference, and the Munich Conference simply gave Hitler more power by giving him Czechoslovakia and more time to continue rearming faster than the British and the French were. But none of that is to say this isn't a great movie. It is a great movie. It's easily a 3.5, 3.75 out of 5-star movie. Depending on how well you like Jeremy Irons, you might even say it's a 4 out of 5. And it's a really important movie for our purposes because Kilroy was here at Munich in 1938 and in the movie theaters in 2021. And if you want to watch it now, you can join Kilroy by getting it. It's on Netflix right now. We'll be back next week with another movie, and I really appreciate your time and attention. Your comments are especially welcome, so please do like, share, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you back here soon.
Kilroy Was Here is a product of the Evocati Legal Services Foundation, Matt Broman, President. This project, and every other project of the Evocati Legal Services Foundation, is done to bring awareness and support to veterans and active duty service members. If you want to be a part of our project, please join us over at www.evocati.org.in. We are committed to serving those who have served us all.